The satellite phone buzzed 3 times before going silent. Captain Marcus Webb stared at the device in his hand, knowing with absolute certainty that the mission he'd just been given would cost lives. The only question was whose. In the Afghan mountains, dawn comes like a revelation, sudden, unforgiving, exposing everything the darkness concealed. Webb watched it creep across the valley floor from his position on the ridge, illuminating the village of Kardara below. Somewhere in that cluster of mud-brick buildings, 3 American journalists were being held hostage by a Taliban commander named Khalid Rashid, and in exactly 6 hours, Webb's team would go in to get them out. Except that wasn't the real mission. Webb had commanded Delta Force operations for 11 years. He'd led men through Fallujah, Kandahar, and a dozen places that would never appear in official records. He knew the difference between a rescue mission and something else, and the orders he'd just received, delivered through an encrypted channel that bypassed normal command structure, were definitely something else. "Sir," Lieutenant Chris Morrison approached, his young face tight with the anticipation that came before combat. "The team's ready for final briefing." Webb nodded, tucking the satellite phone into his vest pocket where it sat like a lead weight against his chest. 5 minutes. I need to review the intel one more time." As Morrison departed, Webb unfolded the mission brief again, though he'd already memorized every word. The official story was straightforward. Delta Team would infiltrate Kardara at 0600 hours, neutralize hostile forces, extract the 3 journalists, and exfiltrate via helicopter before Taliban reinforcements could respond. Standard hostage rescue. High risk but manageable for operators of their caliber. But the satellite phone call had added a complication that changed everything. The voice on the other end had belonged to Colonel Richard Brennan, a man Webb had never met, but whose reputation preceded him. Brennan worked for a classified division that operated in the shadows between military and intelligence communities, handling problems that conventional approaches couldn't solve. "Captain Webb," Brennan had said without preamble, "your primary objective remains the hostage extraction. However, there's a secondary priority that supersedes all other considerations." Webb had felt the first stirrings of unease. "Sir, my orders come through JSOC. Any modifications should go through proper channels." "This comes from above JSOC, Captain. National security priority. Classified beyond your current clearance." A pause. "Khalid Rashid has information about an attack being planned on U.S. soil. We need him taken alive for interrogation, not captured, extracted. You'll have a secure transport waiting at your exfil point." "Sir, a live extraction during a hostage rescue significantly complicates. The journalists are expendable compared to preventing a domestic attack, Captain. Thousands of American lives versus 3. Do the math." The line had gone dead, leaving Webb staring at the phone with a cold certainty settling in his gut. Something was wrong. The whole thing felt wrong, but orders were orders, and the chain of command was sacred, wasn't it? Webb's team gathered in the makeshift operations center, a reinforced tent on the ridge overlooking the valley. 8 men, the finest operators the military had produced. Morrison, his second-in-command, young but brilliant in combat. Sergeant First Class James Bole Hendricks, a demolitions expert who could blow a door without waking a light sleeper. Staff Sergeant Luis Garcia, their communications specialist. Sergeant Mike Chen, medic. The list went on, each man a specialist, each one trusting Webb with their lives. "Listen up," Webb began, activating the tactical display showing satellite imagery of Kardara. "Primary objective: 3 American hostages held in this compound." He highlighted a building in the village center. Jessica Raymond, photojournalist. David Cooper, her cameraman. And Sarah Hendricks. He glanced at Bull, whose sister was among the hostages, their producer. Bull's expression remained controlled, but Webb saw the tension in his jaw. Personal stakes made operators sharper or more reckless. Webb was counting on sharper. Intelligence confirms 12 to 15 hostile forces in the village, probably more in the surrounding area. Khalid Rashid commands from the main compound where the hostages are being held. Webb paused, feeling the weight of what he wasn't saying. Rules of engagement: neutralize all hostile forces. Priority is hostage safety. What about Rashid? Garcia asked. High-value target. Are we greenlit for termination? This was the moment. Webb could repeat Brennan's orders, take Rashid alive at all costs, or he could follow his gut, which was screaming that something about this entire operation was poisoned at its core. Rashid is secondary, Webb said, making his decision. Hostages come first. If we get a clean shot at Rashid without compromising the rescue, we take it. Otherwise, he's not worth risking American lives. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. He detected something off in Webb's tone. The lieutenant was smart, too smart sometimes. Sir, any special considerations we should be aware of? Webb met his gaze directly. Standard rescue protocol. We get our people out. That's the mission. As the briefing continued, covering approach routes, contingencies, and extraction timelines, Webb felt the satellite phone burning in his pocket. He was directly disobeying orders from what was supposedly the highest authority. If Brennan was legitimate, Webb had just committed career suicide at minimum, treason at worst. But 11 years of combat had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was screaming that Brennan's orders would get people killed for the wrong reasons. The infiltration began at 0445 hours, the team moving through the pre-dawn darkness with the silent efficiency of predators. They covered the 3 kilometers to Kardara in 40 minutes, using terrain features and night vision to avoid detection. The village slept, unaware of the ghosts passing through its perimeter. Webb positioned his team in a loose perimeter around the main compound. Morrison and Garcia covered the north approach. Bol and Chen took the south. The remaining 4 operators, including Webb, would make the initial breach and clear the building room by room. All elements radio check, Webb whispered into his comm. Each team reported in sequence, green across the board. Everyone in position. Webb checked his watch. 0558 hours. 2 minutes until go time. He performed a final equipment check. Rifle, sidearm, breaching charges, medical kit, zip ties for restraining prisoners. Everything exactly where it should be. The satellite phone vibrated against his chest. Webb's hand moved to it instinctively, pulling it out to see a single word displayed on the screen. Priorities. A reminder from Brennan. Take Rashid alive. Journalists expendable. Webb powered off the phone and returned it to his pocket. Whatever happened in the next hour, he'd answer for it later. Right now, he had 3 Americans to bring home. All elements. This is Alpha 1, Webb transmitted. 30 seconds to breach. The final seconds counted down in his head with metronomic precision. At exactly 0600 hours, Bol's breaching charge detonated, blowing the compound's main door inward in a controlled explosion that was more sound than fury, designed to disorient rather than kill. Webb was through the opening before the dust settled, rifle up and tracking for targets. The interior was dark, emergency lighting casting harsh shadows. Training and muscle memory took over as he flowed through the structure with his team, each man covering his sector with practiced precision. First room clear, second room clear, third room contact. A Taliban fighter emerged from a doorway, AK-47 rising. Webb's rifle barked twice, center mass. The man dropped. No time for reflection or remorse. Forward momentum was survival. Hostiles second floor. Morrison's voice came through the comm, accompanied by the distinctive crack of suppressed rifle fire. Webb's team cleared the ground floor methodically, encountering sporadic resistance that was quickly neutralized. These weren't elite fighters, just local militia, poorly trained and completely unprepared for a Delta Force assault. Within 3 minutes, the ground floor was secure. Alpha 2 status, Webb called. Second floor secure. Morrison reported. 4 hostiles down. No friendly casualties. No sign of hostages yet. Webb's tactical map showed one area they hadn't cleared. A basement level. Of course, hostages would be kept below ground, away from windows and easy escape routes. Alpha 3 hold perimeter. Webb ordered Bol's team. Alpha 1 and 2 converging on basement access point. The basement entrance was a heavy wooden door, reinforced with metal bands. Webb positioned his team for dynamic entry, nodded to his breacher, and stepped back as the small charge detonated, splintering the door and sending it crashing inward. He was through the opening instantly, descending narrow stone stairs into darkness that his night vision painted in shades of green. At the bottom, a corridor extended into shadow, multiple rooms branching off to either side. And there, in the third room on the left, he found them. 3 Americans, bound and blindfolded, huddled against the far wall. Jessica Raymond, David Cooper, and Sarah Hendricks, alive, terrified but unharmed. Friendly forces, Webb called, not wanting to startle them into panic. We're U.S. military. You're safe now. The relief in their faces as he removed their blindfolds was worth every risk he'd taken to get here. This was why he'd joined the army, why he'd endured selection and training and countless deployments. Moments like this, bringing Americans home. Oh God, Sarah Hendricks whispered, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, thank you. We're not clear yet, Webb said, cutting their restraints with practiced efficiency. Chen, get the medical checks. Morrison, secure our exit route. As Chen began examining the hostages for injuries, Webb's combat instinct, the sixth sense that had kept him alive through countless operations, suddenly screamed a warning. It had been too easy. 12 to 15 hostiles, intelligence had said. They'd encountered maybe 8. Where were the others? And more critically, where was Khalid Rashid? Garcia? Webb transmitted. Sitrap on Rashid's location. Negative contact, sir. Haven't seen anyone matching his description. Webb's unease crystallized into certainty. This was a trap, not for his team. They'd hit too fast for an effective ambush, but for someone. All elements, prepare for immediate exfil, Webb ordered. Chen, can the hostages move? Affirmative. They're good to go. Then we move now. Bull, clear us a path to... The explosion cut off his words, a massive detonation from somewhere above that sent tremors through the basement ceiling. Dust and debris cascaded down as the building shook. Contact. Bull's voice came through the comm tight with combat stress. RPG strike on the compound. Multiple hostiles, heavily armed, moving in from all directions. The trap was springing, just not the trap Webb had anticipated. Alpha 3, fall back to the compound, Webb ordered. Alpha 1 and 2, moving to support with hostages. They ascended the basement stairs to find the ground floor transformed. The controlled assault had become a desperate fight. Through the blown-out windows, Webb could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions surrounding the compound. The Taliban hadn't been unprepared. They'd been waiting. How many? Webb demanded, taking position at a window and returning fire. At least 40, Morrison replied, his rifle barking methodically. Organized assault, not militia. These are trained fighters. 40 versus 8, in a compound that was quickly being reduced to rubble by RPG strikes. The math was simple and unforgiving. Garcia, call in the birds, Webb ordered. Emergency exfil, hot LZ, on it. Garcia's fingers flew across his tactical radio, transmitting the extraction request through encrypted channels. QRF responding, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. They had to hold this position for 15 minutes, while protecting 3 civilians against a force that outnumbered them 5 to 1. Webb made rapid calculations. The compound had good bones, thick walls, limited entry points, but the RPG strikes were systematically destroying their defensive positions. They needed to move. Morrison, there's a secondary structure 50 meters north. Stone construction, better defensive profile. The lieutenant's eyes found the building Webb indicated through the chaos. That's suicide, sir. Open ground between here and there. Staying here is guaranteed death, Webb countered. Bull, lay down suppressive fire on the northern positions. Chen, you and Morrison get the hostages to that structure. I'll cover the move with the others. What followed was the longest 50 meters of Webb's life. His team laid down a wall of fire that temporarily drove the Taliban to cover, while Morrison and Chen hustled the 3 journalists across open ground. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet, several rounds striking within inches of the running figures. Sarah Hendricks stumbled, and for one heart-stopping moment Webb thought she'd been hit, but Morrison caught her, practically carrying her the final 20 meters to the relative safety of the stone building. Hostages secure, Morrison reported. Alpha 1 moving, Webb transmitted, and then he was running through the same gauntlet of fire, his remaining operators providing covering fire for each other in practiced leapfrog movements. An RPG streaked past, missing Webb by less than 5 feet before impacting against the compound wall behind him. The explosion's concussive force threw him forward, his body impacting hard against the ground. Training overrode pain, he rolled, came up with his rifle ready, and kept moving. He reached the stone building, to find his team establishing a hasty defensive perimeter. The structure was better than the compound, older construction with 3-foot-thick walls that would stop anything short of a direct RPG hit. But they were still surrounded, still outnumbered, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Casualties? Webb demanded, doing a quick head count. Bull took shrapnel in the leg, Chen reported. I've got it stabilized, but he needs real medical attention soon. Webb moved to where Bull sat against the wall, his leg wrapped in an emergency dressing that was already showing blood. Can you fight? Can I breathe? Bull replied with a pained grin. Then I can fight. The Taliban assault intensified. Coordinated fire from multiple positions, attempting to pin them down. Webb moved between defensive positions, directing fire and conserving ammunition. His tactical mind was already working through scenarios, none of them good. The extraction helicopters were 12 minutes out. If they lasted that long, his satellite phone vibrated again. Webb ignored it, focused on the battle. It vibrated again and again. Finally, during a brief lull in the firefight, he checked it. A text message. Rashid not in compound. Location: Cave Complex 2 kilometers northwest. Abort exfil. Proceed to new coordinates for primary objective. Webb stared at the message with a cold fury building in his chest. Brennan wanted him to abandon the hostages, leave his defensive position, and pursue Rashid across 2 kilometers of hostile territory. With his team already wounded and low on ammunition, it was madness, it was suicide, and it confirmed every suspicion Webb had harbored about these orders. He typed a single word in response: negative. The phone buzzed immediately. Direct order, Captain. Rashid is the priority. Hostages are acceptable losses for mission success. Webb powered off the phone and threw it across the room, where it shattered against the stone wall. Sir, Morrison had been watching, his expression questioning. Change of plans, Webb said, making his decision. We hold this position until the birds arrive. No deviations, no secondary objectives. We bring everyone home. Morrison nodded slowly, understanding written across his face. Sir, you know there'll be consequences for that. I'm counting on it, Webb replied. The next 10 minutes were the most intense combat of Webb's career. The Taliban, sensing their advantage, pressed the assault with determined aggression. RPGs impacted against the walls. Small arms fire created a constant chorus of death, and the ammunition count dropped with each engagement. Bull, despite his wound, maintained his position, his rifle finding targets with mechanical precision. Morrison coordinated overlapping fields of fire with the efficiency of a natural leader. Chen moved between defensive positions, treating injuries while somehow still contributing to the fight. And the 3 journalists, to their credit, didn't panic. Sarah Hendricks even grabbed a dead fighter's weapon and took up a defensive position, firing with surprising competence when Taliban fighters got too close. Where'd you learn to shoot? Webb asked during a reload. My father was a Marine, she replied, ejecting an empty magazine and slamming in a fresh one with practiced ease. He taught me that surviving wasn't a spectator sport. The sound of rotors cut through the battle noise. 2 Black Hawks appeared over the ridge, their door gunners immediately engaging the Taliban positions with devastating effect. The .50 caliber machine guns tore through enemy cover, suppressing the assault and buying precious seconds. All elements prep for immediate extraction. Webb ordered. Chen, get the hostages ready. The lead helicopter descended toward a small clearing 30 meters from their position. The door gunners continued laying down suppressive fire, but the Taliban weren't backing down. They recognized this as their last chance to prevent the Americans' escape. Morrison, take the hostages. Move now, Webb commanded. The lieutenant didn't hesitate. He gathered Jessica, David, and Sarah and sprinted for the helicopter with Chen covering their movement. Webb and the remaining operators maintained a wall of fire that kept the Taliban from advancing. Bull tried to stand, his wounded leg buckling beneath him. "I've got you," Webb said, moving to support his sergeant. "Go," Bull insisted. "I'll cover the extraction." "Shut up and move, Sergeant," Webb ordered, practically carrying the larger man toward the helicopter. They were 10 meters from safety when the RPG hit. Webb never saw it coming. One moment he was moving forward, Bull's weight against his shoulder. The next he was airborne, the world spinning in a chaos of sound and fury. He hit the ground hard, his body armor absorbing most of the impact, but leaving him momentarily stunned. Training brought him back to consciousness. He was alive. He could move. He still had his weapon. "Bull," he called, locating his sergeant 3 meters away. Hendricks wasn't moving. Webb crawled to him. Combat efficiency overriding panic. Pulse present but weak. Breathing shallow but there. Bleeding severe from multiple shrapnel wounds. "Chen," Webb shouted into his comm. "Bull's critical. Need immediate medevac." Morrison was suddenly there, having handed the hostages off to the helicopter crew. Together, they lifted Bull and ran for the aircraft, enemy fire tracking their movement with lethal intent. They made it, barely, through Bull, into the helicopter bay, where Chen immediately began emergency treatment. Webb and Morrison piled in after, still firing at pursuing Taliban fighters. As the Black Hawk lifted off, the second helicopter provided covering fire as they gained altitude, and suddenly they were clear, rising above the battlefield that had nearly become their grave. Webb looked back at Kardara, now receding into the distance. 3 Americans rescued, one of his own, critically wounded. Mission accomplished at tremendous cost. His satellite phone, or what remained of it, lay somewhere in that stone building, along with his career and possibly his freedom. The helicopter ride to Bagram Air Base took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of Chen working frantically to stabilize Bull, while the rest of the team sat in shocked silence, processing what they'd survived. The journalists huddled together, wrapped in emergency blankets, alternating between tears and grateful silence. Sarah Hendricks caught Webb's eye. "Thank you," she mouthed, the words lost in the rotor noise but the meaning clear. He nodded, wondering if she'd thank him after the investigation, after the truth came out about the orders he'd disobeyed. They touched down at Bagram to find a medical team waiting for Bull, who was immediately transferred to their care. The prognosis was uncertain. He'd lost a lot of blood, and the shrapnel had caused internal damage that would require surgery and potentially months of recovery. As Webb's team was directed to debriefing, he noticed something unusual. Colonel Brennan was there, standing with a group of officers whose rank and bearing suggested significant authority. "Captain Webb," Brennan called, his voice carrying across the tarmac a word. Webb approached, his team falling in behind him in an instinctive show of solidarity. Up close, Brennan was everything his voice had suggested. Hard eyes, rigid posture, the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Your mission report, Captain," Brennan said without preamble. "I'm particularly interested in why you failed to accomplish the primary objective." "The primary objective," Webb replied carefully, "was hostage extraction. Mission accomplished. The primary objective was capture of Khalid Rashid. The hostages were secondary. Sir, with all due respect, my orders through proper chain of command specified hostage rescue as the primary mission. I executed those orders." Brennan's expression didn't change, but Webb saw the calculation behind his eyes. "You received classified modification of those orders via secure communication. Orders you deliberately ignored. I received unauthorized communications from an unverified source," Webb countered. "Standard protocol is to verify all orders through established command channels before execution, particularly when those orders contradict official mission parameters." It was a thin defense, and they both knew it, but it had the advantage of being technically accurate. Brennan studied him for a long moment, then shifted his attention to Morrison and the rest of the team. "And your men, did they also receive these unauthorized communications?" "My team executed the mission as briefed," Webb stated firmly. "Any decisions regarding mission modification were mine alone. He was taking the fall, protecting his people. Morrison started to object, but Webb silenced him with a look. I see, Brennan said softly. Then you alone will face the consequences of your insubordination. He turned to the military police, who had been standing nearby. Captain Webb, you're to be confined to quarters pending investigation into your conduct during Operation Lighthouse. Your team is relieved of duty, pending the same investigation. As the MPs approached, Webb met Brennan's gaze directly. Sir, may I ask one question? You may ask. What was so important about Rashid that 3 American lives were considered acceptable losses? For the first time, something like emotion flickered across Brennan's face. Not anger, but something more complex. That information is classified, Captain. But I'll tell you this. The attack Rashid was planning would have killed hundreds of Americans on U.S. soil, possibly thousands. So yes, 3 lives for potentially thousands. That's a calculation I'd make every time. And if you're wrong, Webb asked quietly, if the intelligence is faulty, or if Rashid doesn't actually have the information you think he has, then what were those 3 lives worth? Brennan didn't answer. He simply nodded to the MPs, who moved to escort Webb away. As they walked across the tarmac, Morrison called out, Sir, we are with you. Whatever comes next, the team stands together. Webb looked back at his men, his brothers, knowing that he'd made the right choice regardless of the consequences. Take care of Bull, he called back. That's an order. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of interrogations, depositions, and legal consultations. Webb was confined to quarters at Bagram, with no contact with his team or the outside world. Military lawyers explained the charges he faced: insubordination, failure to follow direct orders, possibly conduct unbecoming an officer. The potential penalties ranged from career-ending reprimand to court-martial and prison time. Webb spent those days reviewing his decisions, questioning whether he'd made the right call. 3 journalists were alive because he'd prioritized the rescue over Rashid's capture. But what if Brennan had been telling the truth? What if Rashid really did have intelligence about an imminent attack? How many lives might be lost because Webb had refused to sacrifice 3? The moral calculus was impossible. There was no right answer, only the choice he'd made and the consequences that would follow. On the 4th day, everything changed. Webb was summoned to a secured conference room, where he found an unusual assembly. A 2-star general he didn't recognize, several colonels including Brennan, and 3 civilians in suits who had intelligence community written all over them. Captain Webb, the general began, his tone neutral. I'm General Patterson, Inspector General's office. I've been conducting an investigation into the circumstances surrounding Operation Lighthouse. Webb remained at attention, prepared for the verdict that would define the rest of his life. Your actions during that operation have been characterized as insubordinate, Patterson continued. However, certain information has come to light that complicates that assessment. The general nodded to one of the civilians, who activated a display screen showing intelligence reports, communications logs, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. Colonel Brennan's orders to you were based on intelligence, suggesting Khalid Rashid possessed information about a planned terrorist attack on U.S. soil. That intelligence has since been determined to be fabricated. Webb's head snapped toward Brennan, whose expression remained impassive. Fabricated by whom? Webb demanded. By elements within our own intelligence apparatus. One of the civilians answered. We're still unraveling the full extent of the conspiracy, but it appears that a network of individuals across multiple agencies has been manipulating operations for purposes we haven't fully determined. The civilian pulled up another document. The satellite phone you used to communicate with Colonel Brennan, the channel was compromised. The orders you received weren't from legitimate command authority. They were from individuals attempting to manipulate U.S. military operations for unknown ends. Webb felt the implications crashing over him. So Rashid never had intelligence about an attack. Oh, Rashid is a legitimate high-value target, the civilian clarified. But the urgency, the specific intelligence about an imminent domestic attack, all fabricated to create a situation where you'd be forced to make an impossible choice. Why? Webb asked, though part of him already understood. General Patterson answered, because someone wanted to see what you'd do, whether you'd follow orders that cost American lives or refuse and face the consequences. It was a test, Captain, and you passed. The revelation should have brought relief. Instead, Webb felt only cold anger. Bull Hendricks nearly died because of this test. My entire team was put at risk. 3 civilians were used as bait. For what? To evaluate my moral character, to identify officers who can think independently. One of the other civilians said, who can recognize when orders are wrong and have the courage to disobey them. The military faces threats from without and within. We need leaders who can navigate that complexity. We need, Webb corrected sharply, officers who follow the chain of command and trust their leaders. You've just proven that trust is misplaced. Patterson nodded slowly. I understand your anger, Captain, but the reality is more complicated than you realize. The conspiracy we've uncovered extends to the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership. We need people we can trust, people who've proven they'll do the right thing even when ordered otherwise. Is that what I did? Webb asked bitterly. The right thing? Because I still don't know if I made the correct choice. Maybe Rashid did have intelligence. Maybe my refusal to follow orders will cost lives down the line. That uncertainty, Brennan spoke for the first time, is what makes your decision meaningful. You acted based on principle, not certainty. That's what we need. Webb turned to face the colonel directly. And you, sir, were you part of this test, or were you manipulated like me? Brennan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Does it matter, Captain? Yes, Webb replied simply. The room fell silent. Finally, Brennan nodded slowly. I believe the intelligence was genuine. I gave you those orders in good faith, believing I was preventing a catastrophic attack. When you refused, I was furious. I thought you'd let pride or morality override the greater good. He paused. I was wrong. The intelligence was false, and your instincts were correct. You saved 3 lives without sacrificing American security. That's the definition of good leadership. General Patterson stepped forward. Captain Webb, all charges against you are being dropped. Your record will reflect that you acted appropriately, given the circumstances. Furthermore, you're being recommended for promotion and transfer to a specialized unit that requires exactly your type of judgment and moral courage. What specialized unit? Webb asked warily. One that doesn't officially exist, Patterson replied. One that handles situations where the normal chain of command has been compromised, or when orders come from sources that can't be trusted. You'd be working with a small team, operating with significant autonomy, taking on missions that require discretion. Webb understood immediately. They were offering him a chance to become part of the very apparatus that had just manipulated him, fighting corruption from within the system, with all the moral complexity that entailed. And if I decline, then you return to your unit with a clean record and our gratitude for your service. No pressure, no consequences. The choice is yours. Webb thought about Bull, still recovering from wounds that should never have been inflicted, about Morrison and the rest of his team, who'd trusted him to lead them through hell, about 3 journalists who were alive because he'd refused an order. I need to talk to my team first, Webb said. Whatever I decide, they deserve to know the truth. Patterson nodded, agreed. But Captain, the full truth about this operation remains classified. What you can tell them is limited. Then limit my answer to this. I'm staying with my team. Whatever specialized unit you're building, find someone else. I'm done playing games where American lives are the stakes. The response clearly surprised them. General Patterson exchanged glances with the civilians before responding. Captain, with all due respect, you've proven exactly why we need you in this role. The integrity you've demonstrated is exactly why I won't join. Webb interrupted. Sir, you just told me there's a conspiracy at the highest levels of our military and intelligence community. You want me to fight that from within, operating in shadows with no oversight and questionable authority. That's how conspiracies start, General. Good people with good intentions, deciding that normal rules don't apply because the threat is too great. He met each person's gaze in turn. I'm a soldier, sir. I follow orders, I lead my team, and when those orders are wrong, I disobey them and face the consequences. That's the system working. What you're describing is the system failing. And I won't be part of that failure, no matter how good the intentions. Patterson's expression shifted to something like respect. I understand your position, Captain, even if I don't agree with it. Your decision is noted, but there is one thing I need to know, Webb added. The conspiracy you mentioned, how far does it go? How many operations like mine have been compromised? The civilian, who'd been mostly silent, finally spoke. We don't know, Captain. That's the problem. We've identified 3 separate instances of manipulated intelligence, leading to mission compromises. But we can't determine if these are isolated incidents or symptoms of something larger. Then find out, Webb said simply. Use your specialized unit, your shadow operators, your whole apparatus. Root out the conspiracy and restore trust in the chain of command. Because right now, you've shown me that trust is a luxury we can't afford, and that's the real threat to national security. The meeting ended shortly after Webb was released from confinement and reunited with his team, who'd been confined to base pending the investigation's outcome. He found them in the rec room, Morrison organizing a makeshift PT session to work off nervous energy. Captain, Morrison called, relief evident in his voice. Are we clear? We're clear, Webb confirmed. All charges dropped. Team's reputation intact. The relief in the room was palpable. Garcia actually whooped with joy. Chen grinned widely. Even the normally stoic Bull, released from medical care with a leg brace and orders for physical therapy, cracked a smile. What about you, sir? Morrison asked quietly, pulling Webb aside. What happens to your career after this? Webb considered how much he could say. Given the classification restrictions, I'll be fine. They offered me a promotion and transfer, actually. Let me guess, you turned it down. How'd you know? Morrison smiled. Because you're exactly where you want to be, sir. With your team. Webb nodded, feeling the truth of that statement. He'd had a chance to join something bigger, something with more authority and less oversight. He'd chosen instead to stay with the men he trusted, doing the work he believed in. Sometimes the most important decision wasn't about climbing higher. It was about standing your ground. 2 months later, Webb's team was deployed to Syria on a straightforward reconnaissance mission. No conspiracies, no moral tests, just good intelligence and clear objectives. They executed perfectly, gathered the required information, and extracted without incident. On the flight back to base, Morrison sat beside Webb, reviewing the mission report on his tablet. Sir, can I ask you something? Shoot. Back at Bagram, when they offered you that promotion, did you ever regret turning it down? Webb thought about the question carefully. Every day, he admitted. I think about the conspiracy they mentioned, about how many other operations might be compromised, about whether I could have made a difference fighting from inside that system. But I realized something important. The system doesn't need more people operating in shadows, making judgment calls with no oversight. It needs people who follow the rules, who respect the chain of command, and who are willing to break both when necessary and accept the consequences. Morrison nodded slowly. That's a lonely position, sir. Maybe, but it's honest. Webb looked around at his team, these men who'd followed him into hell and back. And honesty might be the most dangerous weapon we have against the kind of corruption that threatens from within. The helicopter carried them toward another base, another mission, another day of service in a profession that demanded everything and promised nothing beyond the knowledge that you'd done your duty as you understood it. For Captain Marcus Webb, that was enough, not because the choice was easy, but because it was right. And sometimes, in a world of impossible decisions and moral complexity, right was the only compass worth following. The hardest order to follow is the one you know is wrong. The hardest order to disobey is the one that might be right. If this story of duty, conscience, and the courage to stand alone resonated with you, honor it by hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales of the impossible choices that define true leadership. What would you have done in Captain Webb's position? When following orders means abandoning your principles, where does real duty lie? Share your thoughts in the comments.